Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and start our session on electronics PHM, which, as you'll find out, is maybe not the best title we could have chosen because we actually have a little bit extra variety, as you'll see in some of the papers here. But I'm excited that you sticking around here the last session before happy hour and post the session. So please stick around. We've got some exciting papers. I'm still not seeing Gang U here. So we may only have 2 papers, but I put it in last of the 3 hoping that they will show up. So we have for sure 2 papers, and I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Henrik Lisby, and his partner Lars Klint are actually not engineers, they're designers, but they'll tell us why they're here. And I've actually known Henrik for 40 years. We grew up in Denmark together, and he now lives in Indonesia, and I live here in Spokane, so that makes no sense. But anyway, so welcome, and I'll let you take over.
All righty then. Yes, that's true. We will change gear a little bit, moving from engineering into architecture and design, graphic design to be more specific. And we talked about this for about a year ago, that it could be interesting to try to apply certain PHM methodology into what we say using a PHM-based visual brand identity management system to manage deterioration of visual brand identities and prolong their lifespan. Let me just elaborate a little bit about what we do. Lars Klint is a professor at the Institute, the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts School of Architecture. Lars is my mentor, now my business partner. I'm an architect, designer, got my master's degree in '93 from that same school. Another one is Heikel. He is an IT professional. He's now sweet home in Jakarta. He couldn't join us, but that's fine. And we are very excited to be here because as designers, we work a lot with people's identities. I'll get a little more into what that is in a little while. And we see very often that these graphic identities, they sort of deteriorate, sometimes quite rapidly. So we have tried to map what it is that goes on when such things happen. Yes. Why do people have a visual identity? Well, the goal of designing a visual brand identity is to establish a visual and graphical expression that links its activities to its desired image. Actually, you want to look right. And that's sometimes a little bit of a challenge. But if we look a little bit into the wording here, we are dealing with 2 things, actually. We are dealing with the brand identity. That is how you, as a company or an organization, wish to appear. How you want your logo, your typeface, your colors, your communication style to express your product or service, whatever it is. The other thing is the brand image. That's actually how the market sees you, how they perceive you as a company or organization. And things have a tendency to go wrong when there is a negative gap between the identity, how you wish to be perceived, and the image, how you are actually perceived. So you want these 2 things to be as close to each other as possible. And it should be a good thing to say that you will be branded. No matter what you do, if you have a company, if you're out there, you will be branded. And if you don't do it yourself, the market will do it for you. And that is rarely the way you want it. So that's why it is important to manage your brand throughout time. Here's just a little example. We'll get more. 2 signs for 2 different restaurants. And this is just to show that even minor changes in the design have an impact on how you are perceived. In this case, 2 restaurants, they are both oval, they are both dark background, they both have used the sans serif font, golden, and made in 3 lines. But still, they have different expressions. You are not necessarily sure how people actually perceive this, because there are a lot of demographical and educational, gender, age, financial situations that come into play. So that's why we are from a realm where 2 + 2 is rarely 4. As a matter of fact, we never quite know what the result is. And that is not the same as saying that we cannot do anything to quantify what is going wrong, but we cannot do it with mathematical precision or numerically. Still, there are things to do, and I'm sure I have spoken here. You have already chosen where to eat. We will not go deeper into that. Typically, a visual brand identity will deteriorate, if not strenuously, time-consumingly, and continuously managed and maintained. And let's just quickly talk about what is a visual brand identity. Well, basically, that's how you look. It would contain your logo, the way you apply your logo. It could contain illustrations, icons, symbols, animations, photographs, the way how you gather all these things to present a visual expression of your company or organization or university for that matter. You have typography, fonts, and colors. It would be the written communication. It could be primary and secondary fonts, specialty fonts, corporate color schemes for both print and screen. You also have such elements as composition and media. How do you compose, for example, your letter paper, your website, your ads? And of course, today it's both in print and probably more so on screen, TV, web, mobile, etc. 3D environments, company clothing, cars, exhibitions, packaging, design, and so on. And basically, these things hopefully play together and create one coherent visual brand image. These examples are actually taken from an existing design manual. That is typically how companies have documented their design, and very often it's a printed book that ends up on somebody's bookshelf and then they forget all about it. And that's of course a shame, because then you have a situation where you very quickly deteriorate. And basically there are two things that happen. Either you experience brand obsolescence. In other words, you get out of date. That could happen either if you imagine you have a logo design that is very, very much of the time it has been designed, which means that in a year or so it may already be outdated. Or it could be if you don't constantly make the needed corrections in your visual brand design, and then suddenly you will see, oh, now we need a rebrand. So that's why it's important to continuously follow up on what's going on. Derailment is a little bit different. That's when your brand becomes out of focus. It speaks in several tongues. It no longer gives the exact expression of what it is supposed to. It speaks another language than you want it to speak, basically. And that would typically happen, you can say, when people fall asleep. Oh, now we have a new design. We just paid $1 million for it. We don't have to do anything. So let it roll. And very, very quickly, it can actually start derailing. External suppliers come in, advertising agencies. We know who made advertising agencies. They're always very creative and say, we can do that better. We don't think we should use that typeface. We'll use another one. Maybe we should change a little bit the colors. And suddenly you have a brand that is going in all directions. That is derailment. Let's have a little example here. You may know of the Finnish mobile phone company Nokia, which actually, this is an example of them not becoming obsolete. They started out as a sawmill back in the 1886, I believe, something like that. And the very interestingly, they chose a fish as their primary illustration instead of a tree or something. But they were located at a river which was known for its good fishing, so they thought that's us. Later, Nokia moved into rubber production, cable production. Now we suddenly have something that could resemble something like a rubber wheel, for example. And they moved on in that direction, and later on they moved into electronics, and there we have it today. But they have constantly tried to express what it is they're doing via their graphics. Whether they have succeeded or not, that's another matter, but at least they have tried. Likewise, the Danish beer, as they say, probably the best lager in the world. It's a brilliant slogan. Here is a historical representation of Bindesbøl's Carlsberg logo and label. And as you can see, it has, through the years, been undergoing minute changes to express the time it is of relevance. And especially what we have seen over the last 20 years is a much, much higher degree of precision within graphic design. And that has been done. Tiny, tiny little changes over time, and this is the latest version where you can see they actually gathered it more, and it's a bit more powerful than up here. And that's just an example of very minute changes that are necessary to keep it up to date, to make it relevant to the times. Of course, you do not change the Carlsberg logo. That would be like changing the Coca-Cola logo. But you make sure that it speaks the language of the time. So they didn't become obsolete either. Now, where do things go wrong? Well, basically they go wrong within these four chronological processes, starting in the design itself. That could be on process level or components level. That is basically the responsibility of the designer. Is he doing or she doing his job or her job well? Have they prepared? Do they know what they are drawing? Do they have their values intact and all these things? And of course, if you don't get it right there, then you start out with the wrong thing. That's not good. Next would be the implementation of the design. Once they have finalized and they have a nice logo and they have decided everything, is to get it implemented into the company. That can be quite a challenge. And usually, where things go wrong would be that they have not secured often actually a quite simple but logical file folder structure, and they have not taken the time to make a useful, meaningful documentation and education of the people within the company who are not designers, but who are the ones who will have to work with this over time. In the ongoing use of the design as is, very often you see a degradation of for example, lack of access. They lose the files. Very, very often I get a call or an email. Henry, can you please send us our logo? I've sent it now 200 times. I mean, enough is enough. So that's because they simply throw them away. And then another thing is they forget where did they put it and which version is now the right one, and well, somebody changed it. So that we need a little discipline. Another thing is hostility. For example, if you make a corporate brand, and that's the financial director who is responsible for that. Unfortunately, he may forget to get the marketing director to play along, which would mean you already have an internal conflict. That would mean that you could very, very easily see that the brand would go down, because the marketing department, they are usually the ones who are responsible for the ongoing use of it, but they are already angry about it because they weren't asked in the beginning. So you have all these psychological aspects as well. And then further, the last point here is when you need to implement other types of design that you do not know. And the thing is, today you cannot foresee what you need. You see how screen sizes, for example, have changed over the last 3-4 years. So you don't really know what your end result will be. So basically, you need somehow you don't have the operational standards. Sometimes you don't have suitable content to what do you do when you need something that's different, that you have not defined in the design manual. That's a new paradigm that is extremely important today. And there are quite a few of culprits within these 4 areas. They are described a little more in the paper. I cannot get into them now, but I can say that basically they will be within this. We have the lack of flexibility in time. That would be the logo is outdated. Mind state, that means you cannot, with no, I would just say logo, but it could basically be the whole brand. You cannot express exactly that particular, I'll get more into this, but exactly what it is you want to say. Is it very serious? Is it a little more on the happy side and so on? It doesn't leave room for that. Lack of access, again, files and documentation happens all the time. And then lack of ways to do it in dynamic interpretations and rules for new and essentially unknown visual and graphical expressions. So, what is needed is a new approach to constructing the visual brand identity documentation, often referred to as a design program. And one way to deal with this could be to introduce slidability. That would, you can say, could go from serious to less serious. For example, you're very serious when you send on your contract, your stationery, that should be very serious. However, if it's a yearly department picnic for the football club of the company, maybe they would need something that's a little less serious. So you have to have some kind of patterns or descriptions that make it possible for people to say, where are we on this scale? Are we on high own identity or are we on low own identity? And what that, another example of this could also be a mall. They have a high own identity at the entrance, but when you come in, each shop needs space to show their own identity. So that's why the mall maybe goes back a little bit. They can of course use the architecture or a website, a sales website where you're on the front page and all the service pages. You have high own identity, but when you go into the actual products, you need to give them space for their brand. That could be 2 examples of that. Here is a Danish example. It's a tombstone and a plaque for a Danish architect, Martin Nyrup, who actually he designed the Danish Copenhagen Town Hall. This is a tombstone. This is a plaque. The interesting thing is that the tombstone is a tombstone. That means you could not take this and put it in the floor of the Copenhagen Town Hall, unless that's actually where he was buried. However, you might want, if the family says, oh, we don't want such a serious grave tombstone, we want something a little more happy. So actually you might be able to go ahead and make a tombstone that was a little more on the cheerful side. But that's, as you can see here, we have the very serious tombstone and the less serious or more cheerful plaque, which is more like a celebration of him as an architect. Another example here would be the Danish tax authorities. We call it authority without militarism. Denmark is a democracy, and a very liberal one, but they have probably the toughest tax law in the world. So you can say that they must have authority, but they shouldn't scare you away. So the authority is built on the crown, this mark over is actually the Danish state seal, which is from the 12th century, something like that, with a crown and the lions. And then they have added this quite beautiful, I think, heavy name, logo type, scat, that means tax, basically. And what they do then is that they are able to add other elements. So you can use these elements when appropriate. And one thing would be this yellow thing. It also contains little dots if you want. You can even use the lines to sort of remove the focus a little bit from the very serious scat and onto something that's a little more friendly. However, when you are the officer, the tax officer, he comes out. He does not have anything yellow on him because he is there in his capacity of representing the Danish tax authorities. He is the authority. So that's why you can actually weigh this entire design program depending on where we are on the brave versus cheerful level. You would say large own or less own identity, but that's the flexibility we are talking about. We have worked and we use it for our clients with a we can call it a visual brand identity management system. That's a hell of a word, but it's actually what it is. And in our case, we're working on it right now. It is under construction all the time. And that's what we use for our clients. It's cloud-based. The next level would be for mobile phones and so on. But basically what it is that it is a centralized platform for storing and sharing and to some extent managing all your visual files, logo files, brochure files, web files, whatever you have. And that place is accessible, of course, for the design vendor, which in our case would be us, for the different branch offices of the client company. It could be print shops that need to do some prints. It could be advertising agencies and so on. But the whole point is that it is one place where everything is collected. And actually it can be a simple web server with FTP access. That's fine, as long as there is a useful file folder structure. And there's one thing we have noticed that is quite interesting actually, is that once you introduce a system like this at a client, they get good habits. It's a little bit like I have been working, one of my clients actually is an energy management company, and they go out and set up energy management systems for clients so they can save energy. And that alone, that they set up a energy management system, makes people aware of that, and they actually start remembering to shut the light and close the windows and so on. And that alone can account for up to 10% of energy savings. And it's the same thing we notice here. The client suddenly becomes aware of the necessity of showing discipline and using the right channels when it comes to accessing and sharing their different designs. We are working with a platform that's where you can have one brand, you can have several brands, you have all kinds of features there. And what we have considered important is that you have a this is graphic design, this is the visual identity. So we focus very hard on useful and clear icons or thumbnails of what it actually is they get when they click on it. And the whole idea is that you get to whatever it is you want to get to with as few clicks as possible. That is important. And then you have the visual file over, you have search machines, automated uploads, user profiles, logging, creative sandboxes, and so on. And as I said, it's currently being developed for mobile apps also. But the point is that if they can see what it is they get, then they tend to be happy. And then we are happy. because then they don't call us and say, send us your logo or our logo. And so basically that's what it's about. One could argue that certain types of automation might be possible. Not in the design process itself. We have generative arts and so on. That's basically more for fun. But I don't see it coming now. I just see this as it's a manual process. It would be what they call experience driven. And it's important that there are people who has responsibility over this, but they just need the tools and the places to deal with it. Then things do not have to go so bad as they often do. And that's basically what we're working on right now. That was it.
Well, we have time for a couple of questions.
I know you can't take a yardstick and go measure degradation of a brain. Is there any tools that you use that you can relate to numbers that can give you some feel for not necessarily the beauty of the art, but the difference between what you want it to be and what you
the most important tools would be our eyes, actually, and that's a fact. No, yeah, you can, of course, there are certain things you can quantify. You can say, we want them to use a Univer and they use a Helvetica and so on. That's a clear mistake that you can correct. But there are no automated numerical values that you can truly, how will you...
I was thinking in terms of like polls or local groups that you query, that kind of thing.
Sales figures.
Sales figures, that's of course always a parameter, but you have to see these things. Of course, you can say certain things have numbers. For example, colors. You define the RGB colors, the hex colors, and so on. That you can check and that you can control. Same being sizes and so on. That's measurable.
Sure.
And you're invited to change that size. But it's not something you can automate. You cannot, not to our knowledge, but it could be interesting if such tools could be developed. But you don't really have any automatic tools that can go in and do this for you. Because what would you actually, maybe you can say, yeah, website, maybe you can go in and see, do they use wrong typefaces and so on. There could be something there. But in general, you must go in and look at it. And another thing that's actually interesting is that design is a brand is a dynamic process, because as we said, the old style design manual, which is like this, and somebody puts it on their bookshelf. What we need, and that's what this system can, is some kind of input where people within the company, however they should be able to upload. For example, we need to make an invitation for our yearly picnic or whatever, and they think it should be a little creative. They should be able to upload these things, and such things should then be evaluated by competent people to see where is this going, why do they have this need, and is this something we should honestly incorporate into the design and set up some dynamic rules. It's not easy, but it's not impossible. So that's why you can say your design manual becomes like a tool where you can go in and remember the slide, and then go in and see here. Now we are here on the slide, and now we are in the very serious part, and now we are in the less serious part. Yeah. So you can go in and see some examples. Right. How could we do it if we are here? And that's why we believe in this model, an online model, as being a dynamic thing that grows instead of just a static book. A static book is fine if you need to reprint your business cards and so on. That's fine, but it's not good for the going concern that constantly needs to change.
We're going to move on here shortly. Was that a short question?
Yeah, the short question here. Have you looked at the brand identity dilution because the product line maybe perhaps over a period of time appeal to a different demographic of the audience? You know, I know when you guys do marketing and sales studies, you probably look at market segmentation and targeting of certain products and what have you. So one example could be, for example, DVD players, you know, maybe 20 years ago or 15 years ago might have appealed to a much younger demographic. But now only the old guys buy because the young folks want to get something more whiz-bang like tablet PCs or something that's a lot more portable. Have you looked at some of those kind of aspects in brand identity dilution?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, and today is really an interesting time because you mentioned pads and phones, and because you don't know where does this end. It can end everywhere. If it's a website, you need a responsive website that can change. That's extremely important, and also that's a challenge because you don't know exactly where people see this. So that's why we need this dynamic design program where it can change according to primarily where is it shown. But taking the product brand and the corporate brand may be a different matter. I mean, for example, Procter & Gamble. They have the Procter & Gamble, tiny little word at the back, and their branding is basically all their products. It's called a house of brands, whereas Mercedes-Benz, that would be a branded house where everybody, they have just a different S105 and whatever the car is. It's the same brand basically. So that's up to the company. I think today the trend is getting rid of some of the many brands they have, sort of do some brand minimization to be able to manage it a bit more, but that would depend on the company.
All right. Okay, quick question.
Thanks. To draw parallels with traditional PHM in an engineering discipline, it's basically a brand is an asset to a company, and to stop it going obsolete or getting derailed, you are in essence maintaining that brand, so it's a preventative maintenance. Obviously, it's very difficult for you to quantify the benefit, and it's very difficult for people in engineering disciplines to quantify the benefit of doing preventative maintenance on assets in the first place. But because it's so intangible, if you found that now you are offering this to clients and you're doing this and you're becoming more proactive with this, that they're actually getting a better return because they're basically maintaining themselves better.
Yes, that's the hope.
Yeah, it's very difficult to quantify those, but it's obviously it's easier for engineers because we can say if that breaks it'll cost X million. But are you finding that it's easier to get buy-in from managers because they're seeing benefits from this, even though it's such an intangible sort of feeling, basically?
Yes, but it's an attempt to see if we can quantify this a little more than just saying, oh, that's ugly, we have to redraw that. An attempt to get in and say, where did you go wrong? When and why? That's basically our pilot project in this.
All right, let's thank our speaker.